Welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we are looking at something that is quietly but fundamentally rewiring the digital plumbing of the entire internet. We're talking about how a single regional regulation is essentially forcing the creation of a global trust infrastructure for artificial intelligence. If you care about how digital work is authenticated, how businesses are adapting to AI, or just where the tech industry is heading next, well, this is exactly what you need to understand. Let's get into it.
Think about it for a second. How do you actually know if an AI touched a document? It sounds like a simple question, right? But it represents a massive, growing crisis of digital trust. Every single day, millions of documents, images, and emails are generated, summarized, or translated by machines. And as these AI models become completely indistinguishable from human output, we urgently need a way to tell the difference. Not just by eyeballing it, but by actually checking the underlying data.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap. We'll cover the invisible AI stamp, how regulation scales globally, text watermarks versus C2PA, why processing does not equal authorship, the market fallout, and finally, the key signals to watch next. Part 1. The invisible AI stamp.
To really get what's happening here, we have to look at the timeline because it moved incredibly fast. August 2nd, 2026 was a hard cutoff. That was the date the EU AI Act's new transparency rules took effect for any new AI models. Just 8 days later, August 10th, Anthropic updated its Help Center to announce a massive shift. Any Claude models launched in the EU on or after that August 2nd date now support a machine-readable mark right out of the gate. But here's the truly fascinating part. This isn't just an EU update. Today, this machine-readable marking is rolling out globally. It covers the Claude app, the API, tools like Claude Code and Claude Cowork, and even cloud access through giant partners like AWS, Google Cloud, and Microsoft Foundry.
Moving on to Section 2. Regulation becomes global infrastructure. Okay, think about this. A rule written in Brussels is literally changing how Claude behaves in every single market worldwide. This perfectly captures the macro geopolitical driver behind this whole technical change. The EU AI Act includes a code of practice on transparency of AI-generated content. Now, instead of building some messy, fragmented system where Claude behaves one way in Paris and a totally different way in Chicago, Anthropic, along with other major tech players, honestly, has realized something absolutely crucial. It is operationally way simpler, and frankly, a lot more defensible, to just deploy one single worldwide compliance standard. The extraterritorial effect of the EU AI Act means that compliance design in one major jurisdiction effectively becomes the default global infrastructure for everyone. So what actually is this new infrastructure? Well, it's built on a machine-readable mark. That is a signal that software can detect, even when a human being cannot see it at all. We are not talking about a visible logo stamped in the corner of your image or a clunky disclaimer at the bottom of your essay. No, it is an entirely new invisible competitive layer of provenance that is highly auditable by software and institutional detection tools.
Section 3. Text watermarks versus C2PA.
First up, we need to establish our vocabulary a bit. You're going to hear the word provenance a lot in this space. It simply means information about where a piece of content came from and how it was processed. Its origin story, basically. To achieve this for media files, the tech industry is turning to something called C2PA. This is an open standard that attaches cryptographically signed content origin and edit history data directly to files. Think of it as creating a verifiable digital chain of custody. And this brilliantly illustrates the two totally different ways Anthropic is pulling this off. For language, they use text watermarks. Now, this isn't metadata. It's actually an imperceptible statistical or structural pattern woven directly into the generated text itself while the AI is writing it. It's designed to be completely unobtrusive to a human reader, but glaringly obvious to software. On the flip side, for media files like SVG, PNG, and JPG images, Anthropic uses that C2PA metadata we just talked about. This means bolting on that cryptographically signed origin data to the file. So two very different types of outputs, two completely different marking methods.
Section 4, and this is absolutely crucial. Processing is not authorship.
I really want you to hold on to this analogy from our sources. Think of Claude's watermark as a washable stamp applied inside a document. Just like a physical stamp that a piece of paper might get when it passes through, say, the accounting department, this digital mark simply says, hey, I was here. A scanner can detect that the document passed through Claude's digital workshop at some point. We really have to define the hard boundaries of this technology because it's easy to misunderstand. The mark proves that the content passed through Claude's workshop. Maybe it was just used for a quick translation or some light proofreading. But crucially, it does not prove a lack of human originality. An output might be heavily marked by Claude, but contain entirely original human ideas that were just, summarized or reformatted by the AI. Furthermore, this mark does not establish truthfulness, accuracy, copyright ownership, or intent. It is simply evidence of processing. It is absolutely not a verdict on misconduct.
Section 5. Winners, Losers, and Limitations. Whenever the ground shifts this dramatically in tech, there's always market fallout. So who are the potential winners here? Well, regulators clearly win because they finally get a real technical implementation path for their transparency rules. Enterprise buyers, major publishers, and schools gain a massive advantage, a machine-readable signal that backs up their disclosure and compliance checks. Detection tool providers obviously benefit as this invisible marking becomes standard infrastructure. And strategically, Anthropic positions itself brilliantly here. They are no longer just selling raw AI intelligence, they are actively selling trust and compliance as a core product feature to highly regulated organizations. That's a huge deal. But where there are winners, there are definitely exposed groups. Think about everyday users who just rely on Claude for editing or drafting their own confidential documents. There's a real friction here. They might rightfully worry that an employer or a teacher will scan a document, see processed by Claude, and falsely assume it was written entirely by AI. Additionally, developers who are building their own apps on top of Claude's API now suddenly inherit all these complex compliance and disclosure questions. And spare a thought for the smaller AI model providers out there. They now face intense financial and engineering pressure to match this global compliance standard just to stay competitive with enterprise buyers. Now, remember that washable part of the stamp analogy? Bad actors aren't exactly eliminated by this update. Millions of dollars in sophisticated cryptographic infrastructure can basically be bypassed by taking a screenshot on your phone or converting a file format. It's kind of crazy. Aggressive paraphrasing, running it through another translator, mixing text from different sources, or just manually stripping the metadata completely breaks the signal. Ultimately, right now, it is still a fairly fragile system. Finally, Section 6. Signals to watch next. Anthropic has noted that documentation and support for third-party detection are coming soon. Once those tools are actually out in the wild, independent evaluators need to measure the real-world robustness of this system. Here are the metrics that actually matter. We need to watch the rates of false positives, saying a human wrote something when AI did it, and false negatives. We definitely need to know the minimum reliable text length for a watermark to actually hold up. We must track the survival rates of these marks after a human goes in and manually edits the text. And crucially, we need to see how well this performs across diverse languages, and especially when generating computer code. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. The hidden power shift here is immense. Anthropic now controls a signal that follows content beyond their original app, out into the wider world. So the real question is, when does this optional context turn into an automated gatekeeper? Will schools, publishers, employers, and social platforms start using this invisible mark to automatically reject job applications, grade papers, or filter our content? This invisible compliance plumbing is going to impact our everyday digital lives, for sure. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I highly encourage you to keep a very close eye on this evolving trust infrastructure.